A good character in fictional media ideally must be interesting and compelling enough to warrant a viewer's interest no matter the genre. Many of my favorite characters stand out to me because of their complexities, like the Maximal Warrior Dinobot from Transformers Beast Wars with his questionable morals and vicious but honorable personality, or Nuparu, the friendly inquisitive Matoran-Toa engineer from Bionicle. Sometimes, some fictional media are more populated with basic characters, and that could be okay as long as they're entertaining and likable, like the charmingly obedient drill sergeant from Skylanders, or Hero Factory Stringer with his laid-back but friendly attitude and his weapons being sound-based. However, then you get to the spectrum where some characters are so stripped back, boring, and derivative to a point where they are generally uninteresting. These are characters who take specific traits from their own franchises but don't manage to properly stand out in their own regard, making them uninteresting when compared to the rest of the cast. These are bland characters. Now, it should be specified that just because a character is more basic does not equate to them being bland. For instance, Leonardo from TMNT is a more mature and straight-laced character compared to his brothers, but he works because he acts as a straight man to all the other turtles' unique attributes, reminding them of their responsibility. Personally, Donatello may be my favorite, but I can appreciate Leonardo's role because he provides the balance to the turtles. What I believe to be a bland character is a character that fails to stand out on their own merit, in their own franchise, and even outside that. And these examples, from best to worst, are characters I consider to be bland through and through. So grab a drink, sit back, and relax. Even if it's water, because it certainly has more flavor than these characters. And before we get started, I should note that this video is my personal opinion, and is made for the sole purpose of entertainment. What you might consider to be a bland character is super different to the way I might consider a character bland, and that's perfectly fine. Also, spoiler warnings for some particular franchises. Anyway, without further ado, let's get straight into it. First and foremost, it shouldn't go without saying that Cardinal Sin is not a game best known for its characters. With the exception of Stygian, Biomorphia, and maybe Sin herself, a lot of the characters are very archetypal of a specific fantasy race or creature. Let's see, you have your elves, your dwarves, your knights, your orcs. Though the cast is slightly more diverse with the likes of Nephra and Plague thrown in, as characters they just tick off the respective Egyptian and zombie box. All of the characters are quite simplistic as well in their motivations. Heck, Orion and Junie even share the same motivation in trying to restore peace in nature to the Bloodlands. Only the starting roster gets some information from the manual, and even then there isn't too much to work with in terms of their personality. Being a secret character only unlocked when beating the gamer's mighty paralysis demon known as Mongoro, information surrounding Kahn is incredibly sparse. I really can't tell whether he's meant to be a Viking or a Mongolian-inspired warlord like Genghis Khan. Judging from his FMV cutscenes, he enjoys fighting, but the opening FMV establishes that most of the clans thrive on battle, so that's nothing new. His ending shows he keeps trophies of those he defeats, but so does Mongoro, and that was executed in a way more bone-chilling manner. He does plaster his face on the Swords of Trinity, causing its secrets to be permanently lost to time, so one can gather he's extremely arrogant and full of himself. So overall, I could decipher that Kahn prides himself on being the best fighter of his clan, and wants to further prove that by beating Sin. He's easily the most generic character in Cardinal Sin, and you know what? I don't mind that. Yeah. I've mentioned before how I sometimes don't mind a basic character, and this is another instance of that. All the secret characters minus Sin and Kron has the same weapons as the starting characters, yet they're not echo fighters like how Lucinia is a direct copy of Marth. Kahn has the same weapon choice as Mongoro, but he is quicker in his attacks at the cost of having less range, plus I find his charge attack to be very fun to pull off. Kahn, for me, works with simplicity. Sure, he's just a poor man's Wizen, but he was never aiming to be anything groundbreaking as a character, which can be applied to pretty much all the other fighters. He is just a rowdy, boisterous barbarian who revels in battle, emblematic of a warmongering society in the Bloodlands, and that's just enough for me. Simply put, he is a bland character I like, which is more than what I can say for the others on this list. we venture once more to the wacky world of Just Dance. Look, the lore routines in the latest 3 games give me an excuse here, okay? Just Dance never really had proper characters up until Just Dance 2023 edition with its Enter the Dance versus lore. And I mean, it's a nice attempt, but aside from Jack Rose, who had a surprisingly great introduction through his routine, the story itself is incredibly basic, with frankly, quite basic characters in my opinion. And its main villain, Nightswan, I personally feel isn't all that compelling. She's a damn good placeholder for a main antagonist, and she has a really awesome and imposing design, but that's where my compliments end, as I just find her a nothing villain. Yes, even with a recent backstory lore given to her in mind, but we'll be there in due time. To summarize, Nightswan wants to take over the dance versus, so she abducts coaches and corrupts them into her own army, but gets defeated by the equally boring Sarah breaking it down. In the following Just Dance game, she abducts Sarah and then corrupts each of the Just Dancers one by one. Why couldn't she have just done that first? It causes the main story to end in a bleak tone and with a forced rock cover of Tainted Love. Soft Cell was literally around the corner, guys. Nightswan has solid foundations, but she desperately needed substance, and I guess her backstory tries. It's revealed she was a human, invited to dance with a traveler, falls in love and decides she wants to stay, grows bored and tired of her life with him, so she dances around and catches the attention of Cygnus, who shows her some generic prophecy, then before you know it, she's evil now! Woo! Woo! Okay, so you're telling me she's a witch version of Nadiki from Bionicle, but take away any of the internal conflicts and tragedy caused by his fall from grace, and you have Nightswan. Okay. She doesn't even feel the mildest bit concerned or curious from seeing the prophecy shown by Cygnus, and she just pulls us on 180 degrees in her morals. Apparently she was corrupted by a need for perfection, but her turn to evil felt more forced if anything. That's not an excuse. Some Just Dance choreographies, or hell, even dance in general, are able to tell a decent story. The choreo of Numb by Linkin Park has both emotionally charged visuals and body language in its routine, which is based on the message of the original song, and it's not even part of the main lore. Nightswan is probably the most pretentious character on this countdown. She has solid foundations, but she lacks proper depth to her character, and that's why I find her so contrived and bland in execution. However, to cut Ubisoft some slack, this is the first proper antagonist for Just Dance, which is first and foremost a rhythm game, so obviously there's going to be more of a priority on the routines than the dance versus lore. So, enjoy your mercy while you can, Nightswan, for that you could have been way lower on this countdown. What do you think of my decision, Nadiki? Nadiki?
Compassion was always your weakness, brother.
Gen V is okay. It's a nice detour from the main events of the boys, and it paints a nice picture of the reprehensible lengths young soups have to go to get fame, mixed in with the usual challenges of a high-end college. However, one character stuck out for me in the fact of how super disposable he felt, and that character is the Godolphin Uni dropout Dusty. He is introduced partway through the series as someone who throws out of campus parties, and his power is decelerated aging. Interesting, sure. He is also a jerk, but like, pretty much every soup in the series are either a jerk or worse, to the point where you can count on your fingers how many of them are genuinely well-intentioned or moral in just the boys alone. We're introduced to Dusty at the end of the episode prior, and just as Marie, Jordan, and Andre get teleported into Kate's mind in episode 6 after she has a seizure caused by mind control superpowers, Dusty also joins in on the fun, and I knew he was going to die. There's no doubt about it here. And guess what?
Out of my way!
Explosions!
Dusty is so bland and unimportant that the boys wiki leaves him out entirely in the plot synopsises for the 2 episodes he appears in. I don't have nearly as much to say on Dusty as opposed to Nightswan, but that's because I'm given very little to work with here. All he serves to do is enhance the threat level of Kate's subconscious, and none of the other characters even address, let alone mention him after his death. At the very least, watching him complain about the situation around him compared to how serious the main characters are provided a nice contrast. A simple one, but moderately entertaining nonetheless. This is a minor positive that none of our last remaining characters even have. In the 6 years that followed the mainline console releases, Skylanders has quite the extensive cast of the Skylanders themselves, the NPC allies, and the creative and wacky villains. However, come Imaginators, I felt that some of the new senseis reused concepts not just from other Skylanders, but also from each other. For example, I find Flevol's personality too similar to Trigger Happy, or how Hoodsickle and Pit Boss practically have the same black hole pit trap attack. However, I do feel at least that some senseis are saved either by an interesting and complex moveset, or at least an entertaining personality. Last year, I acquired a lot of new senseis for my Skylanders collection, and admittedly, I've started to gain a new appreciation for the sensei Skylanders. Mr. Cat, however, isn't one of those senseis. Let's talk design first. Mr. Cat is obviously a cat mixed in with a centaur, which in theory I should be really into as I have a preference for cats. But the common purple color scheme of a magic element, mixed in with how Mr. Cat doesn't really look like a cat, makes this design extremely dull in my opinion. Another important design aspect to note is that all of the senseis barring the returning Trap Team villains are all unified with a black costume and a gold belt. For some senseis it works well with their aesthetic, while for other senseis it just makes their overall design less memorable. Case in point, for Pit Boss, I feel it enhances his design and further gives him an intimidating presence, but for Mr. Cat that design choice just feels absolutely forced and strips him from a lot of identity. His moveset sadly adds more to his yawn factor. A long-ranged beam? Double Trouble did that 5 years ago, and that beam actually locks onto enemies. Being able to create clones of his past selves? Yeah, but like, isn't that Deja Vu's entire thing? Placing a decoy to distract enemies? Well, yeah, okay, except that's literally what made Self-Help famous. All of Mr. Cat's attacks I find to be too similar to other, much better Skylanders who executed those same attack patterns in a higher standard. And, much like any other sensei, because Mr. Cat is pretty darn powerful, I personally find it really useless to try to strategize all his attacks together. Because, and I kid you not, even when fully upgraded, all I find myself doing with Mr. Cat is summoning multiple clones, picking off enemies with his primary attack, summon a new clone when one disappears, rinse and repeat. In the main game, you could literally spam these two moves and succeed in every combat scenario. About the most notable and intriguing attribute about him is that there was confusion about what his gender was due to Mr. Cat being voiced by a female voice actor. An attribute I might add is completely external to Mr. Cat's generally uninteresting traits.
The master of mystery.
There are definitely plenty of well-made and simply put, fun senseis to pick from in Imaginators, but Mr. Cat made me legitimately think that Activision ran out of interesting ideas and slapped this Skylander together and called it a day. Overall, I think Mr. Cat is a Skylander that is perfectly playable, but as a character, I don't get much mileage out of him, in part of how lackluster his design and gameplay is. And, speaking of feline-inspired characters... Ah yes, the evil doppelganger. This could mean one of two things for me. Either they provided insights to a particular character's inner demons, or provide a legitimate threat of their own, or they could just be a mindless evil clone just here to lazily expand a villain's roster. Transformers, with its expansive 40-year history, is definitely no stranger to this trope, and it's been used in effect to varying degrees of success. One example that just didn't click with me at all is Transformers Cybertron's nemesis Breaker, who is easily my least favorite character in that show. He isn't my least favorite Transformers character in general. Heck, even the continuity he comes from, that being the Unicron trilogy, there is hefty competition in that regard. Even still, it's not saving him of how there are utterly little points of legitimate interest with Nemesis Breaker's character. Nemesis Breaker was introduced midway through Cybertron, where he is created by Megatron while he was in a ghost-like state. Not gonna bother to go into detail how it happens. The Autobots Leo Breaker attacked him impulsively, which created,
Nemesis Breaker, who was the manifestation of Leo Breaker's confrontational personality and jealousy of Optimus Prime's newest combined form, the Sonic Wing mode. Nemesis Breaker had the ability to combine with Megatron to form his Dark Claw mode, who was on par in terms of strength and power with Optimus Prime and Leo Breaker's Savage Claw mode. Megatron would put his Dark Claw mode to use numerous times for the next 4 episodes until Megatron made the utterly terrible mistake of going to Scotland, where the planet's leader Metroplex beamed to a pulp, and I guess Leo Breaker sort of dies.
And nothing of value was lost.
Leo Breaker functions as a toy advertisement, a mindless creature of destruction who can form Dark Claw mode. My god, he's such a nothing character. I did feel shocked when he died, but that was more so because of how he was easily phased out of a cartoon, like if he never really made an impact in the first place. Nemesis Breaker is at the top of my list because Transformers have proven in the past when they can make an evil doppelganger interesting before. Scourge from Robots in Disguise, no, not that one, being my favorite example, as he had a lot of agency in that show's frankly minimal plot. When his protoform came to life, he inherited Optimus's leadership skills, but none of his benevolence, being substituted with Megatron's rage and ambition. But despite those similar traits to these two characters, he still stands out. He is ruthless, cunning, and competent, and isn't below causing collateral damage and human casualties. This makes him more menacing in contrast to Skybite and his goofy legion of comedic Predacons, and in my personal opinion, this show's iteration of Megatron. Forget combining with the guy. When his Megatron got trapped in a cavern, Scourge and his Decepticon troops left him to die. Nemesis Breaker, on the other hand, has no personality and only serves to be a power-up for Megatron and the Decepticon's pet cat. I'm not kidding, he barely even shows up in his robot mode outside of his stock footage, which is regrettably the most interesting thing about him as he transforms into his arm mode more robotically and in reverse order to Leo Breaker despite Nemesis Breaker being a palette swap of him. Transformers Cybertron has some of the more unique characters in Transformers fiction, and there isn't really any character there that I outright despise, even though there are definitely some characters I prefer over others, therefore making Nemesis Breaker even more of a bland stain in Cybertron's otherwise diverse cast.
Sadly, this video is about to come to a close, but what characters do you think are equally bland? Ironically, it'll be even more interesting hearing if they're even more blander characters than the ones I mentioned today. So do let me know in the comments. I'm open to any opinions. Like, comment, and subscribe. And I'll see you all in the next video.